Guns are not inherently evil or good, they're just a gun.
We cannot separate the conversation about mass shootings from the access to guns in our country.
To talk about mental health and gun violence is just a cop-out.
Sandy Hook happened, Columbine happened. We need to have a plan ahead of time.
America has witnessed some of the deadliest mass shootings in the last 50 years. Why do they keep happening? And is there a link between mental health illness and gun violence? I'm Rana Kamal. This is Our Issues, Twin Cities. On November 5th, 2017, a lone gunman entered First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, shooting and killing 26 lives, the youngest only 5 years old. The month before that, 58 people were killed after a gunman opened fire on a crowd of concertgoers on Nevada's Las Vegas Strip from the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay. These kind of tragedies have rocked the nation and have become far too common. Why do they keep happening? And why is it so difficult to prevent mass shootings from reoccurring?
It was an act of pure evil.
Following the tragedy in Sutherland Springs, Texas, President Trump said the shooting was not a gun situation, but rather a problem of mental health. It's an age-old debate. Are these tragedies a result of easy access to guns in America? Or, as the president suggested, is it the outcome of a mental health crisis? We gathered a group of scholars, an NRA member, gun owners, mental health professionals, and a reverend to ask this very question.
Are guns to blame, or as the president believes, are mental health issues creating these mass shootings?
The majority of people with mental illness are not dangerous. They're more likely to be victims than they are perpetrators. In my view, it's the interaction between what I call motivation and method. So the mass shootings are created by somebody having the motivation to do that, for whatever is creating that motivation. And the method is the gun that had a bump stock that could, fire multiple rounds like an automatic weapon into a crowd.
In interpersonal gun violence, where I shoot someone else, mental illness is only a factor 4% of the time. Guns are a factor 100% of the time. And so we cannot separate the conversation about mass shootings from the access to guns in our country.
To talk about mental health and gun violence is just a cop-out. And both the Democrats do that and the Republicans do that. Obama also talked about, after Sandy Hook, the mentally ill people should not have access to gun. It's not the mental, psychiatric patient who is struggling every day. They're not going to hurt anybody. If they hurt somebody, they're going to hurt themselves. And also we have to take a look in terms of gun violence or suicide rate in this society. What, 2/3 of the
nationally,
people?
2/3 of gun deaths are suicides, but in Minnesota it's 75%.
75%.
And sometimes it's as high as 85%.
And we cannot talk about gun violence without talking about, homicide and the suicide.
Another thing that is a common factor in mass shootings is that in over 50% of those cases, there's been a documented history of domestic violence. We know that if there is domestic violence and there is a gun in the home, a woman is 5 times more likely to be killed by her partner. We also know that domestic violence doesn't always follow gender lines.
I look at it from the guy on the street, I guess. To me, guns themselves are not the issue. Guns are not inherently evil or good, they're just a gun. The acts that you see going on, I think, are more of an issue on a societal level than it is an individual with a gun. why is it in the American psyche today that you will see an increase in gun violence, or so on and so forth? Even just narrowing it down just to gun violence, I think is wrong too. Yeah, I think you have to look at a bigger picture beyond the gun level. Why do we have the amount of drug abuse that we have going on?
Would you say then that this is more, gun violence is more attributed to socio-demographic and socio-economic issues?
No,
No.
because
No.
other countries have people who are suicidal. Other countries have people who are violent, but they don't have the rates of gun deaths that we do because they don't have the access to guns that we do. You're 25% more likely to die of a gun death in the United States because we have guns. But we're not 25% more likely to be mentally ill in the United States or to be violent in the United States. So the guns are making a difference.
The states that has more access to gun, they have more homicide.
States with the strongest gun laws have the lowest rates of gun death. And that is shown over and over and over again.
I know they've done studies, and I know there's been studies out there that have shown that like more liberalized gun carry, that you find crime rates actually dropping in those states.
That is not true. If you look at rates of gun deaths, the states with the strongest laws have by far the lowest rates of gun deaths. Chicago is actually number 17 on the rates of gun death. It's not at the top of the list. And states, cities and states.
It's a violent city where people are getting shot. I mean, daily, far more than Minneapolis, probably St. Louis,
and because they have guns coming in from Indiana and Wisconsin, and
also
there's a huge gun trafficking rate.
Who are using those guns?
I'm a gun owner. I'm a veteran. There is a constitutional right to have arms. The question is, in my mind, can the government legitimately put parameters around not only can the government control guns? And we already do, because we cannot legitimately go out and buy a Tommy gun or a bazooka.
I think we're like the NRA would be coming from, and some gun owners, and to me, to some extent, is it becomes a slippery slope argument. If we're going to impose this, we've got gun laws. I think there's like 15,000 gun laws already. We've got laws that will cover pretty much everything that we're talking about here already on the books.
So how do we figure out where those loopholes are?
The gunman who killed 26 was diagnosed with a mental illness, was able to pass background checks and purchase,
was a domestic abuser.
Was convicted of domestic abuse.
And was able to purchase 2 guns. How do we keep firearms out of the hands of those who do suffer from mental illness or who do have flagged backgrounds?
Well, that's the whole thing. Is from what I understand, he wasn't flagged. He should have been flagged from the military, so he should have not been able to.
Yet the gun lobby is trying hard to keep us from passing Fix-NIC, which would fix the national instant criminal background check system to enable or to force groups like the Air Force to actually give those records over.
They're looking to do it right now.
Well, they did it in a very evil way. They combined Fix-NICs with concealed carry reciprocity as a poison pill amendment to make sure that those that really want to do something about gun violence prevention would vote against it, because no one who wants to do something about gun violence prevention is going to vote for concealed carry reciprocity. So what they did is they very cynically took a law that was designed to make us safer and poisoned it with a bill that's designed to make it easier for anyone to carry a gun in this country.
I don't think it's poisoning.
We need to talk to people like the gun owners and people of the NRA members, but we have to take a look at we have to believe in data. You know, that NRA, they did such a way that you could not have any research work done on gun violence. Take a look at that data, what's happening, and then come with a civil and safe gun policy. Nobody's going to take guns away from anybody.
Up next on Our Issues Twin Cities, how gun violence has affected our schools across the nation and what our community is doing to keep our students and faculty safe.
The troubling history of school shootings across the nation has affected one too many communities, especially in the past 20 years. In Minnesota, 2 students were shot and killed when a freshman entered Ricori High School in Cold Spring in 2003. In 2005, 16-year-old Jeffrey Wise went on a killing spree at his high school of Red Lake Senior High, leaving 7 people dead after murdering his grandfather and his grandfather's girlfriend.
I tell all the kids my #1 job is to keep them safe. Nice.
As the principal of Ridgeview Elementary in Bloomington for over 20 years, Steve's life is dedicated to the well-being of his school kids.
We practice keeping them safe. It might be practicing how we respond to kids who are making mean comments or, being mean, but also when we know that there might be a threat, what we do to keep ourselves safe is really important.
That's the ultimate goal. It all boils down to life safety.
Former police officer and sergeant, Paul works in Bloomington Public Schools in efforts to keep students safe through trainings and lockdown drills.
In case of an intruder entering a building, what do the lockdown drills entail?
The lockdown drills entail immediate acknowledgement or awareness that we have a threat in the building. The identification that our safe condition for this building is lockdown, and then automated or a public address announcement to all teaching staff, everyone in the building, that we need to follow our lockdown procedures. Teachers are trained and they know exactly what to do in lockdown. Over the past number of years, the teachers really are rock solid on what they need to do for lockdown. So once the threat is identified and that safe condition occurs, the principal places the school in that condition, they make contact with 911, and they assume command over the radio.
Over the walkie-talkie, I go into my office, I take command so that I can help facilitate the things that are happening throughout the building.
In 1999, armed students Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold entered their school of Columbine High, terrorizing their fellow classmates and teachers, killing 13 and wounding 20.
For my first responsibility getting on scene was to tending to students that had been shot multiple times outside the building, leading kids to safety.
Rick led the crisis team in the Columbine High School tragedy. Today, he's the district's executive director of community relations and emergency management.
What are you doing in the community to keep our schools safer in case of a shooting?
In schools we deal with crisis in a given year. It's a wide spectrum. The new towns and the Columbine High School situations are on one end, and the everyday kind of bumps and bruises a student will have is on the other. But there's a lot in between, and we deal with those. I wouldn't say every day, but probably weekly there's some kind of incident that we have to deal with. Our urban schools systems deal with it far more frequently than many of our suburban and even rural, but no one is immune. And so it comes down to education, conversations with each other, and really keeping our eyes and ears open to the ground and being there for kids. One of the things that we were criticized at Columbine High School is that the 2 murderers fell through the cracks, and that there were lots of red flags, there were signs. But the reality is that all of the averted school shootings, those that have not occurred, is when someone came forward, whether it was a student or someone that came forward and told an adult or told police. And by that intervention, that's the only way we've been able to not have more tragedies. You could pick up a newspaper, you could watch TV and hear about these across the country. You don't hear a lot about them because they don't make the headline news, but they occur. And those are the victories. Those are the bright things that we in the education world and emergency management world count our blessings when those happen because they were averted.
The school district performs 5 lockdown drills a year to prepare faculty and students in case of an emergency.
The more we train, the more we drill, the more we prepare students and staff, the more our brain then tends to revert back to that piece that it knows in those high-stress situations.
How important are these lockdown drills, especially today, to keep kids safe?
They're important to practice. First of all, if under any kind of stressful situation, you naturally do what you've practiced. And so we never know when anything stressful is going to happen or anything outside our doors is going to happen. So practicing is really important. It's also important for kids to know and to kind of have deep in their hearts and know that they are safe when they're here at school.
How effective have these lockdown drills been?
I think they've been very effective because we've really focused on the timeliness of implementing the safety plan so that the immediate sense of the threat brings you immediately to decision making of going to that safe condition.
How important is it that all schools across America implement these lockdown drills?
I said on the front side that schools are very safe, and they are. But Sandy Hook happened. Columbine happened. So we need to have a plan ahead of time so that we know what to do. The last thing you want to have happen when a threatening situation occurs is to have to go to a wall and look at a list and say, oh, I have to do this, oh, I have to do this. No, we drill.
When the bad stuff happens, knowing what to do can be the difference between chaos and calm and even life and death. And that's why school districts across the country and states, I believe in almost all states, there's a requirement that they have drills, that they have a plan in place to know what to do.
They're really essential to keep everybody in the building safe, all right? We plan for the worst, hope for the best, all right? And in all likelihood, not anything like what has happened throughout the country that we hear about in the news is going to happen here. But if in fact it might, we want to be ready to handle it in a way that keeps everybody safe.
More with the panel when we return.
The U.S. has the highest number of guns per capita. In fact, there are more than 300 million guns in our country. 30% of those guns are in households across the nation.
Do you think that if it wasn't so easy to get a gun in America, that these tragedies would not happen, or that gun violence would decrease? Or do you believe that, as you were saying, if someone does have an evil intention, that they will carry out that evil intention no matter how hard it is to get a gun, whether gun laws become stricter, or in the case that they become completely banned?
We tried prohibition. Well, people drank anyways. So you're going to have those people getting out there. Guns are going to be out there to the criminals who want the guns. If we ban all guns, criminals are going to be out there. We already banned guns for a certain amount of people. Well, they still have them and they still shoot people and everything else. So those laws are already out there.
But we do know that the states that have the stronger laws have lower rates of gun death. We will never stop every tragedy. We never will.
Right.
But we could treat guns the way we treat cars in this country. And in 40 years, we cut deaths by car accidents in half. And we didn't confiscate cars to do it. We did it through legislation, making cars safer. We did it through litigation. You can't sue a gun company. It's the only protected class in the United States. We did it through education.
And
we
with
had
knowledge.
Friends Don't Let Friends Drive Drunk, which changed everything. And we did it by technological advances. In all of those ways, we could make gun ownership safer in this country if we didn't have a very powerful lobby out there doing everything in its power to keep us from doing so.
I'm not advocating for confiscating or no guns. I don't think anybody around here is. I do think, I go back to my analogy of motivation and means. If somebody has the motivation to kill, they're going to drive a car into a crowd or they're going to take knives out and slash people up. However, if someone has the means for even more mass destruction through, you know, or through assault-style weapons that have magazines that carry 100 rounds and have access to all of that, they're going to do even more carnage. We're not going to stop all violence. The question is, do we have a right and responsibility to control the means? And the Supreme Court is clear on that, and we do have that right. And it doesn't mean that we're going to squelch all gun ownership. It just means we can put parameters around it.
Like Randy said, that we cannot stop every person from causing this kind of problem. The whole society have to work on that. We need laws to protect, to cut down the access of gun.
The factor of is there a gun in the home is one of those questions that can indicate domestic violence that becomes escalated to the point of homicide. In over 54% of those cases, it's the same for mass shootings. So it is one common question. Does that mean that no one should have a gun? I don't believe that. But what it does mean is that when someone has been convicted of domestic violence and they have access to a gun, that is a really sweet spot for disaster. So I think it's about safety planning, and it's about providing and asking those really hard questions about balancing freedoms, whether it be victims' freedoms or people that have used violence, their freedoms.
We have to find a way to balance the right of responsible gun owners who do have the right to possess a gun, and they should have the right to possess a gun, which is the vast majority of them. But we also need to balance that with the right of people in our society to be safe. And right now, we've tipped the balance too far in the direction of everyone has the right to carry a gun everywhere.
How do we move forward and work together in order to reduce gun violence in our country?
I'm more in agreement with you, is that we have to look at, like I said, the big picture of the whole thing, not just necessarily gun violence. Why, I mean, I think that becomes a focal point. It doesn't necessarily answer the bigger question to what is happening within society. And I like what you said, was when you said it is a complex issue. And I think when you, there again, if you're looking at gun violence and it becomes the focal point rather than domestic abuse, and bigger issues from there. So I think we have to look at it as the big picture of things.
I actually
take a
agree with you.
multi-prong
I
approach
do agree
and
with you
address
on that.
each of those.
We need to look at trauma. We need to look at anger management. We need to look at domestic abuse. We need to look at, it's about 0.5% of kids growing up in urban environments where there's a lot of gun violence that are actually going to perpetuate gun violence. We need to look at how we identify those young people and give them the treatment that they need and the care that they need, keep them out of being incarcerated so that they can choose a different life. I'm agreeing with you on all of that. But I also strongly maintain that we have to also regulate who can have access to a gun. It's a both and for me.
I think you can regulate, and I think there is certain elements that should not have guns.
You said that you don't believe that all people should have access to guns.
Correct.
So who do you think should not?
Well, I think your violent criminals who've got a past with violence, or I think that certain the mental disorders, or even somebody who's repeatedly beating his wife, or wife's beating the husband or something. I think that those people, I think you can look at restricting those people. So there are certain elements out there I don't think are an issue with, and for me, and I think the majority of even NRA owners would say, no, I don't have a problem with that.
But how do we do that without passing those comprehensive criminal background checks, for instance?
Well,
how do we keep the guns out of those hands if we don't have comprehensive criminal background checks?
So we were talking earlier about the concealed carry across state lines. For me, it's kind of I'm not sure how I feel about that yet totally, because I am a big believer in states' rights, and I think the state should be able to regulate certain within their boundaries.
My take home is we have a right and a responsibility to regulate.
Thank you for joining me this week on Our Issues Twin Cities. I'm Rana Kamal. See you next time.